When 5 child actresses disappeared from a training session for a show at a New York film studio in 1999, the case was systematically buried. After a decade of silence, the tragedy was considered permanently unsolved. But in 2009, a single piece of evidence from that day finally surfaced: a video cassette mailed anonymously to a disgraced journalist. The tape's existence proved the key to the case wasn't a missing lead, but a sinister event that someone had witnessed and recorded. Ingrid Westbay was arguing with a stubborn city official over zoning variances in a noisy Manhattan coffee shop when the past landed on her desk across town. The official, a man named Bernard Kroll, possessed a droning voice and a tie that seemed permanently fused to his neck. He was currently deep into a monologue on the historical significance of setback requirements, entirely oblivious to the lukewarm coffee growing cold in Ingrid's cup. It was October 2009, and this was the topography of Ingrid's life now: zoning boards, community garden disputes, and the occasional ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new bike lane. "Mr. Kroll, we are talking about a variance of 3 feet, Ingrid interrupted, rubbing her temples where a headache was beginning to bloom. "It's for a community center, not a skyscraper." The neighborhood board approved it unanimously. Kroll adjusted his glasses, peering down at the blueprints spread across the small table as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "Miss Westbay, protocol dictates that we adhere to the established guidelines. Setbacks are crucial for maintaining the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. If we make an exception for the community center, what's next? Anarchy? Chaos? People building patios wherever they please?" Ingrid resisted the urge to sigh. This was her purgatory. She worked for the City Chronicle, a small independent paper operating out of a cramped office above a dry cleaner in Chelsea. The smell of starch and cleaning chemicals was the soundtrack to her days. It was a galaxies away from the New York Post, where she had been a rising star in investigative journalism 10 years prior. That trajectory, that life, had ended abruptly in the summer of 1999, incinerated by a story that Monolith Pictures, one of the largest film studios in the world, had systematically buried. The Starlight 5. The name still tasted like ash. 5 girls, aged 10 and 11, Kira and Calla Valentine, Zariah Ocampo, Talia Shapiro, Jessica Rowan, aspiring actresses auditioning for a new children's show. They had vanished during a training session at Monolith's New York studios. Ingrid had been one of the few reporters to aggressively pursue the story, sniffing out rumors of negligence and impropriety on set. The backlash had been swift and brutal. Sources dried up, editors questioned her credibility, and eventually she was let go, blacklisted from every major publication in the city. The silence surrounding the case was absolute, impenetrable. "Miss Westbay, are you even listening?" Kroll snapped, his voice piercing through her reverie. Ingrid forced a smile, the expression feeling brittle on her face. "Every word, Mr. Kroll. Aesthetic integrity. Crucial." Her phone vibrated violently against the table. She glanced down. A text from her editor, Dave Riggins. "Urgent package arrived for you. Looks weird. Get back here." Weird was unusual for the Chronicle. They mostly received press releases and angry letters about parking tickets. A flicker of something, curiosity maybe, or perhaps just a desperate desire to escape Kroll, stirred in her chest. "Mr. Kroll, I apologize, but something urgent has come up at the office. I have to go." Ingrid stood up, gathering her things, leaving Kroll mid-sentence, his mouth open, in protest. The subway ride back to the office was a suffocating crush of damp coats and impatience. Ingrid clung to the overhead bar, the rhythmic screeching of the train echoing the anxiety building in her chest. Urgent, weird. It stirred something dormant within her, a flicker of the adrenaline that used to fuel her days, the thrill of the hunt. She pushed through the glass door of the Chronicle, the familiar smell of cleaning chemicals hitting her like a wall. The newsroom was a chaotic mess of stacked papers, ringing phones, and overworked interns. Dave Riggins was waiting by her desk, holding a cup of coffee like a shield. He was a man perpetually burdened by the financial precariousness of independent journalism, his expression usually one of weary resignation. Today, however, he looked anxious, energized. "What is it, Dave?" Ingrid asked, shrugging off her coat. "On your desk." "Courier dropped it off about an hour ago. No return address. The guy was jumpy, wouldn't leave his name." Ingrid walked to her desk, a cluttered island in a sea of similar islands. Sitting squarely in the center of her keyboard was an envelope. It wasn't a standard business envelope. It was an old airmail envelope, the kind made of thin, cream-colored paper that had yellowed slightly with age. The distinctive red and blue parallelogram pattern ran around its border, instantly evoking a sense of distance, of time past. In the top right corner, a printed blue stamp featured the Statue of Liberty, with New York printed above it. A faint black postmark was visible nearby, partially obscured. The iconic blue silhouette of Lady Liberty was also printed on the left side. It looked like a relic from another era, ancient and out of place in the digital age. She picked it up. It was rigid, heavy, suggesting something inside other than paper. Her name was typed, not handwritten, on a label affixed to the front. The font was old-fashioned, slightly uneven, suggesting an actual typewriter. "Well, open it," Dave urged, hovering nearby, his curiosity overcoming his usual caution. Ingrid slid her finger under the flap, which was already partially open, and pulled it back. She tilted the envelope, and a black object slid out onto her desk with a heavy thunk. It was a video cassette. She turned it over in her hands. A Sony Hi8-MP 8mm format, obsolete technology. The label was pristine, the red stripe across the top bold and defiant. The numbers 120/60 indicated the recording time. The plastic casing was clean, the tape visible through the small clear windows. The second item was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Ingrid unfolded it with trembling fingers. The message was brief, typed in the same uneven font. The Starlight 5 case. Please do something. The air left the room. Ingrid stared at the words, the noise of the newsroom fading into a dull roar. The Starlight 5. It wasn't just a cold case, it was a tomb, sealed shut by money and power. And now someone had just handed her a key. She felt a jolt, a mix of exhilaration and profound dread. The case that had destroyed her reputation was suddenly, terrifyingly active. The ghosts of 1999 had found her. She grabbed her digital camera from her desk drawer, a habit ingrained from her days covering crime scenes, and quickly photographed the envelope and the tape exactly as she had found them, the juxtaposition of the aged airmail paper and the stark black cassette, capturing the bizarre intrusion of the past into the present. The objects sat on the dark, textured brown surface of her desk, a still life of mystery and menace. "Ingrid." "What is it?" Dave asked, his tone shifting from curiosity to concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ingrid looked up, her eyes focused on the Hi8-Tape. "I might have." She realized the immediate obstacle. "But I have no way to play this thing. Do we have anything that can handle an 8mm cassette?" Dave shook his head. "Not since the Clinton administration. We digitized everything years ago." Ingrid grabbed her coat, the weight of the tape heavy in her pocket. "I need to find a player. Now." She burst out onto the street, the urgency of the hunt propelling her forward. The mundane world of zoning variances had vanished, replaced by the images of 5 smiling girls in bright yellow uniforms, their faces frozen in time, their fate unknown. The silence had been broken. The hunt for a functional Hi8 camera proved to be a frustrating odyssey through the graveyard of obsolete technology. The major electronics stores offered nothing but blank stares and suggestions to try online auction sites. The pawn shops were overflowing with discarded DVD players and first-generation smartphones, but Hi8 equipment was nowhere to be found. Ingrid paced the streets of Manhattan, the tape in her pocket feeling heavier with every passing hour, the urgency of the note. "Please do something," echoing in her mind. She widened her search, venturing into the outer boroughs, calling specialized camera repair shops and vintage electronics dealers. The responses were overwhelmingly negative. The technology was too old, the parts too scarce, the demand non-existent. Finally, she found a lead. A small, cluttered shop in the East Village, Retro Media Revival, specializing in vintage audio and video equipment. The shop was a chaotic labyrinth of dusty shelves overflowing with reel-to-reel tape decks, VCRS, and ancient computers. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and dust. The owner, a man named Leo, with a beard as cluttered as his store, listened to her request with a knowing nod. He seemed unfazed by the obscurity of the format, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask for a Hi8 camera. "Hi8, huh? Haven't seen one of those in a while. You looking to buy or rent?" he asked, adjusting a knob on a vintage synthesizer. "Rent. Just for a few hours," Ingrid said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. Leo disappeared into the back room, a chaotic vortex of wires and circuit boards. He returned minutes later with a bulky Sony Handycam, circa 1998. It was gray, heavy, the plastic casing scarred with use. "This one works. Batteries charged. $50 for the day. Cash only." He plugged it into a small, flickering CRT monitor on the counter. The camera whirred to life, the mechanical sound instantly transporting Ingrid back to the late 90s. Ingrid paid him, the cash transaction feeling appropriately clandestine. She hailed a cab back to her apartment, the traffic crawling through the mid-afternoon congestion. The city outside the window seemed distant, unreal, her focus entirely on the camera resting on her lap. Her apartment was small, a one-bedroom overlooking a brick wall. It was a stark reminder of her reduced circumstances, the price she had paid for pursuing the truth. She closed the blinds, plunging the room into darkness. The silence of the apartment was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city. She connected the camera to the TV using the RCA cables Leo had provided, the familiar red, white, and yellow jacks clicking into place. The process was meticulous, almost ritualistic. She handled the tape with an almost reverential care, as if it were a sacred artifact. She inserted the tape into the camera, the mechanism whirring to life with a mechanical clatter. The television screen flared blue, the word video hovering in the corner. She took a deep breath, the anticipation tightening in her chest. She pressed play. The screen flickered, static racing across the display before resolving into a grainy image. The footage was degraded, the colors muted, the edges blurred. There was no sound. Complete silence. The absence of audio made the images feel surreal, detached from reality. A timestamp in the corner confirmed the date, July 15th, 1999, the day the girls vanished. The perspective was immediately jarring. It was low and restricted, filmed through narrow vertical slats. Ingrid realized she was looking through the doors of a closet or a wardrobe. The view beyond the slats showed a brightly lit room, racks of clothing, mirrors, makeup tables, a costume room. The camera operator was hiding. The realization sent a chill down her spine. Someone had been there. Someone had witnessed something. Ingrid leaned closer, her face inches from the screen, analyzing every pixel. The footage was shaky, the camera operator clearly nervous. For the first minute, nothing happened. The room was empty. The silence was unnerving. Ingrid waited, her patience strained, her eyes scanning the screen for any detail, any clue. Then the door to the room opened. Two figures entered, young girls. Ingrid recognized them instantly, even through the grain and the distortion. Talia Shapiro and Jessica Rowan. They were wearing the bright yellow collared shirts and plaid skirts from the promotional photos, the uniforms of the Starlight Five. They seemed relaxed, laughing silently at some unheard joke. The sight of them, so vibrant, so alive, was a punch to the gut. A third figure followed them into the room. An adult man. Ingrid's breath caught in her throat. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit, but his back was entirely to the camera. Throughout the entire sequence, he never turned. His face remained completely obscured. A deliberate choice, perhaps? Or a cruel twist of fate? The man walked towards a sofa positioned against the far wall. He sat down, the cushions sinking under his weight. The girls followed him. This was where the interaction shifted from innocent to deeply unsettling. Talia and Jessica didn't just sit next to him, they crowded him. They seemed to be cuddling against him, almost laying on him. One girl rested her head on his shoulder, the other leaned against his chest. The man's arms were around them. The view was frustratingly incomplete. The arm of the sofa obscured the lower half of their bodies. The slats of the closet door fractured the image. It was impossible to see exactly what was happening. But the intimacy was wrong. The context was wrong. The body language was predatory, possessive. Ingrid watched the sequence repeatedly, pausing, rewinding, looking for any identifying detail. A ring on the man's hand, a cufflink, a reflection in the mirrors. Nothing. The camera remained fixed on the sofa, the silent tableau playing out like a nightmare. The man seemed to be talking to the girls, his head tilting towards them. They responded, their movements languid, trusting. The innocence of the scene made the underlying menace all the more horrifying. After about 3 minutes, the man stood up. The girls followed him. They walked out of the room, the door closing behind them. The camera remained on the empty room for another minute, the silence stretching out, heavy and suffocating, before the footage abruptly cut to black. Ingrid ejected the tape, her hands trembling. She was sickened. The image of those girls, so trusting, so vulnerable, clinging to the unidentified man, was burned into her mind. It wasn't definitive proof of a crime, but it was powerful circumstantial evidence. It confirmed the rumors she had chased a decade ago, that something dark was happening behind the scenes of the Starlight 5 production. The fact that someone felt the need to film this from a hiding place confirmed that they knew this interaction was inappropriate, perhaps dangerous. They were a witness who had remained silent for 10 years. Ingrid knew she had to take this to the police, but the thought filled her with dread. She knew exactly how they would react. The institutional resistance, the fear of challenging the powerful, the shadow of Monolith Pictures, it all stood between her and the truth. The next morning, Ingrid walked into the NYPD's Cold Case Squad headquarters. The air in the squad room was stale, smelling of burnt coffee and old paper. It was a place where hope came to die, the walls lined with filing cabinets containing the city's forgotten tragedies. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of unsolved mysteries, the ghosts of the victims lingering in the fluorescent light. She had called ahead and secured a meeting with Detective Marcus Thorne, the lead investigator currently assigned to the Starlight 5 case. Not that there had been any active investigation for years. Thorne was a veteran detective, weary and cynical, with a reputation for being thorough but resistant to political pressure. He was the gatekeeper of the past, the arbiter of which cases deserved a second look. Thorne met her in a small interrogation room, the walls bare except for a dusty mirror. The room was cold, sterile, designed for confrontation. He didn't offer her coffee. He sat across from her, his expression impassive, his hands folded on the table. "Miss? West Bay?" "It's been a while," Thorne said, his voice neutral. He remembered her from 1999, from the press conferences where she had shouted the uncomfortable questions, the aggressive reporter who had been silenced by the system. "Detective Thorne, thank you for seeing me." Ingrid set the Hi8 camera and a small portable monitor on the table. She didn't want to hand over the original tape, not yet. She needed to control the evidence. "You said you had new evidence." His tone suggested he highly doubted it. Ingrid explained the arrival of the package, the anonymous note, the contents of the tape. She kept her voice calm, professional, masking the turmoil churning inside her. She pressed play. Thorne watched the footage in silence, his expression unreadable. He didn't move, didn't react, his eyes fixed on the screen. The grainy images flickered in the small room, the silence amplifying the tension. He watched it twice, the second viewing slower, more methodical. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "This is it?" he asked, the skepticism clear in his voice. "It shows two of the missing girls with an unidentified man in a highly inappropriate interaction filmed on the day they disappeared," Ingrid said, her voice tight. "I see what it shows, Ms. West Bay, and I also see what it doesn't show." Thorne ticked off the points on his fingers, a prosecutor dismantling a weak case. "It's 10 years old. It's anonymous. We have no chain of custody. The man is unidentifiable, and the actions, while unsettling, do not definitively show a crime. I see no coercion, no force, just an interaction." "It was filmed from hiding, Detective." Someone knew this was wrong. Someone was scared. "Or someone was trying to extort someone," Thorne countered, his voice hardening. "We see this all the time. Old tapes conveniently appearing years later, usually when someone needs money. This isn't an extortion attempt. This is a plea for help. Please do something." "Look, I appreciate you bringing this in, but it's not enough." "Not enough for what?" "To ask a few questions? To reopen the investigation? To finally challenge Monolith Pictures?" Thorne sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of bureaucracy. "This is the Starlight 5 case. Monolith Pictures, you know the drill. We can't just go knocking on their door without strong probable cause. The political fallout—" He trailed off, shaking his head. He didn't need to elaborate. Monolith was deeply embedded in the city's political and economic fabric. Their lawyers were legendary, their influence pervasive. "The political fallout already happened, Detective." To me, Ingrid's voice rose in frustration. 5 girls disappeared, and everyone just looked the other way because the studio's lawyers were louder than the family's cries for help. "Are you going to let it happen again?" "I know the history, Ms. West Bay. And I remember what happened to your career, which is why I'm telling you, tread carefully. This tape is a grenade, and you're holding it? So you're not going to do anything?" "I'm going to log the evidence. I'm going to send it to the lab for analysis, but until we have something more concrete, a name, a face, a witness, my hands are tied." He stood up, the gesture signaling the end of the meeting. "Don't do anything reckless, Ms. West Bay, let us handle it." Ingrid packed up her equipment, the cold reality of the situation settling in her stomach. Thorne wasn't a bad cop. He was just a realistic one. He knew the limits of his authority. He knew the rules of the game. She walked out of the squad room, the weight of the tape heavier than before. The institutional resistance remained firmly in place. If the police wouldn't help her, she would have to find answers herself. She knew where she had to start, with the only person who had never stopped searching. Ingrid spent the rest of the afternoon digging into the current status of the Starlight 5 families. It was a depressing exercise in the entropy of grief. The initial media frenzy had faded quickly, replaced by silence and the slow erosion of hope. Most of the families had eventually ceased their public appeals, retreating into private grief, trying to rebuild their shattered lives. The relentless agony of uncertainty had proven too much to bear. The Shapiro family had moved to Arizona, seeking refuge in the desert sun. The Rowans had divorced, the strain of the tragedy tearing their marriage apart. The Ocampos had stopped returning calls years ago, retreating into a self-imposed isolation. But one family remained, Sylvia Valentine, the mother of the twins, Kira and Calla. Sylvia had been the most vocal advocate, the one who refused to let the case die, the one who still held vigils on the anniversary of the disappearance. She was the keeper of the flame, the voice of the forgotten victims. Ingrid found her address in a quiet neighborhood in Queens. She took the subway, the rhythmic rocking of the train, doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. The familiar landscape of the city blurred past the window, her mind preoccupied with the task ahead. Sylvia's house was a small, well-kept bungalow, the lawn immaculate, the flowers vibrant. But the appearance of normalcy was a facade. As Ingrid approached the front door, she felt the weight of the past decade pressing down on her. The house felt heavy, saturated with sorrow. She rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door opened. Sylvia Valentine stood there, her face etched with lines of grief that hadn't been there 10 years ago. Her hair, once vibrant red, was now streaked with gray. Her eyes, however, still held the same fierce determination, the same flicker of defiance. "Ingrid Westbay?" Sylvia recognized her instantly. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was wary, guarded, the tone of someone who had been disappointed too many times. "Mrs. Valentine, I need to talk to you about Kira and Calla." Sylvia hesitated, her eyes searching Ingrid's face, looking for a sign of hope, a glimmer of possibility. Then she stepped aside, allowing Ingrid to enter. The interior of the house was a shrine to the twins. Photos covered every available surface: school portraits, vacation snapshots, candid moments of childhood joy. The girls smiled down from the walls, their faces frozen in time. On the mantelpiece, Ingrid recognized the vibrant photo collage from the promotional materials. The 5 girls smiling in their bright yellow and plaid uniforms, a painful reminder of the future that had been stolen from them. The colors were so bright, so saturated, it almost hurt to look at them. "What is it?" Sylvia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Have they found something?" The question was laced with a desperate hope that Ingrid hated to extinguish. "I don't know yet. But I received something in the mail yesterday." Ingrid set up the camera and the monitor on the coffee table. The bulky equipment looked out of place amidst the delicate memorabilia of the lost girls. "What is this?" "It's a videotape. From 1999, filmed on the day they disappeared." Sylvia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes widened, fixed on the monitor. "Where did you get this?" "I don't know who sent it." "But you need to see it." Ingrid pressed play. Sylvia watched the footage, her body rigid, her breath shallow. When the girls appeared on the screen, she let out a choked sob. The sight of them, moving, laughing, was a visceral shock. "That's Talia and Jessica," she whispered. "They're wearing the uniforms." When the man entered the frame, Sylvia leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, scrutinizing the obscured figure. "Who is that? Do you recognize him?" "I don't know. His face is never visible." They watched the interaction on the sofa. Sylvia's reaction was visceral, her face contorted in disgust and horror. The ambiguity that Thorne had dismissed was irrelevant to Sylvia. She saw what Ingrid saw: a violation. "What are they doing?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why are they?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered, unbearable. When the footage ended, Sylvia buried her face in her hands, her body racked with sobs. Ingrid waited, the silence broken only by the sound of Sylvia's grief, the raw, agonizing sound of a mother confronting her worst fears. "My girls aren't in the video," Sylvia finally said, wiping her eyes, her voice regaining a measure of control. "But that's the costume room. I remember it. And those uniforms? I took it to the police. They said it's not enough." Sylvia laughed bitterly. "Not enough?" "That's what they always say. They never wanted to investigate Monolith. They were too scared." The bitterness hardened into anger, a cold fury directed at the system that had failed her. "I'm not scared," Ingrid said, her voice firm. Sylvia looked up, her eyes searching Ingrid's face. "Why are you doing this?" After what they did to you, they destroyed your career? Because it's the right thing to do. Because I can't let this go. Because I owe it to them. The footage had galvanized Sylvia's desperation. It had transformed her grief into action. She grabbed Ingrid's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You have to find out who that man is. You have to find out what happened to my girls. Promise me. I will. But I need your help. Sylvia nodded, a new sense of urgency in her eyes. She went to a closet and pulled out a large plastic bin, overflowing with papers. It was heavy, the physical manifestation of a decade of obsession. This is everything I have, she said, placing the bin on the table. My notes, my suspicions, the names of everyone involved in the production, everything the police ignored. Ingrid looked at the disorganized mass of information, the chaotic archive of grief. It was a daunting task, but it was a start. For the first time in 10 years, she was no longer alone. Ingrid spread Sylvia's notes across her dining room table, the papers covering every available surface. It was a chaotic archive of grief, handwritten timelines, phone logs, newspaper clippings, and fragmented memories. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, a testament to Sylvia's relentless dedication. Ingrid realized that identifying the man in the video was secondary to a more immediate goal: identifying the person who filmed it. That person was the witness, the person who sent the tape, the key to the entire case. The footage was filmed in the costume room, Ingrid reasoned, organizing the papers into categories. The person hiding in the closet must have had access to that space. We need to focus on the costume and makeup department. The obstacle was significant. Monolith Pictures had buried the production so deep that obtaining an official crew list was impossible. The unions claimed to have no record of it. The cover-up was comprehensive, meticulous. Ingrid and Sylvia began the arduous task of manually reconstructing the crew list. It was painstaking work, requiring hours of cross-referencing Sylvia's fragmented notes with Ingrid's old industry contacts. They scoured outdated union registries, obscure industry databases, and even old gossip columns, looking for any mention of the production, any name linked to the Starlight 5. The process was grueling, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of urgency. They worked late into the night, the silence broken only by the rustling of papers and the clicking of the keyboard. Slowly, painfully, a list began to emerge. 20 names, costume designers, makeup artists, wardrobe assistants, a list of ghosts. Now the real work began, tracking them down. Ingrid started with the names at the top of the list. The costume designer, a woman named Eleanor Vance. Ingrid found her working on a Broadway production, a lavish musical with an extravagant budget. She met her backstage, the air thick with the smell of hairspray and sweat. The contrast between the vibrant energy of the theater and the darkness of the case was jarring. Eleanor Vance? I'm Ingrid Westbay. I'm investigating the disappearance of the Starlight 5. Eleanor's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her face paled, her hand trembling as she clutched a sequined gown. The name alone was enough to trigger the fear. I have nothing to say about that, she whispered, her eyes darting around the crowded backstage area as if expecting monolith spies to emerge from the shadows. I have a videotape, filmed in the costume room, on the day they disappeared. Eleanor stiffened. The mention of the tape confirmed her worst fears. I don't know anything about a tape. You need to leave. Now, I signed an NDA. They will ruin me. She turned and disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the theater, leaving Ingrid standing alone amidst the glittering costumes. The next name on the list was a makeup artist, David Chen. Ingrid tracked him down to a high-end salon in Soho. He was applying lipstick to a wealthy socialite when Ingrid approached him. David Chen? I need to talk to you about the Starlight 5 production. David froze, his hand slipping, the lipstick smearing across the woman's cheek. He quickly apologized, his face flushed with embarrassment. He glared at Ingrid, his expression hostile. I don't know what you're talking about. I never worked on that production. I have your name on the crew list, Ingrid insisted. The list is wrong. Now leave before I call security. He turned his back on her, his dismissal absolute. She visited several other former crew members. The reaction was always the same: hostility, fear, and denial. It was a wall of silence built on NDAS and the pervasive fear of Monolith Pictures. 10 years later, the cover-up was still firmly in place. The silence was absolute, impenetrable. One interview stood out: a wardrobe assistant named Sarah Jenkins. Ingrid found her living in a small apartment in the Bronx, working as a seamstress in a dry cleaner. She seemed more vulnerable than the others, the fear in her eyes mixed with a flicker of guilt. "I can't talk to you," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling as she folded a shirt. "They threatened us. They said they would blacklist us from the industry. They said they would come after our families." "Who threatened you, Sarah?" Ingrid pressed gently. "I don't know. The lawyers? The executives? They made it very clear what would happen if we talked." "Did you see anything unusual that day? Anything related to the girls?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. I can't. I'm sorry." She turned and disappeared into the back room, the sound of her sobs echoing in the small shop. Ingrid returned to her apartment, exhausted and demoralized. The wall of silence seemed impenetrable. She had underestimated the reach of Monolith Pictures. They hadn't just buried the story, they had terrified everyone involved into submission. She realized she needed a different approach. She couldn't rely on cooperation. She needed leverage. She needed to find a crack in the wall. She looked at the tape sitting on her coffee table. There had to be something she missed, some detail, some clue hidden in the grainy footage. She decided to take the tape to a specialist video lab, hoping that modern technology could uncover what the human eye could not. If the witness wouldn't reveal themselves, perhaps the tape would reveal them. Ingrid found a forensic video analysis lab in Midtown, a sterile environment far removed from the chaos of the newsroom. The lab, Digital Forensic Solutions, specialized in restoring and analyzing archival footage for legal cases. She met with a specialist named Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to the detective, a man who spoke in technical jargon and treated the footage like a crime scene. "The source material is heavily degraded, Doctor," Thorne explained as he digitized the Hi8-Tape, the process capturing every flaw and artifact of the obsolete format. The digitization process was slow, meticulous, requiring specialized equipment and software to extract the maximum amount of information from the magnetic tape. The resolution is low, the lighting is poor, and the compression artifacts are significant. The magnetic tape deteriorates over time, creating noise and distortion. "Can you enhance it? Stabilize the image? Improve the clarity?" Ingrid asked, the anxiety gnawing at her. "We can try. We can use algorithms to reduce the noise, stabilize the shaky camera movement, and adjust the contrast and brightness. But don't expect miracles. You can't create information that isn't there." Dr. Thorne worked on the footage for several hours, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. Ingrid watched over his shoulder, her eyes fixed on the screen, hoping for a breakthrough. The technical jargon, motion compensation, deinterlacing, color correction, was meaningless to her, but the results were visible. The enhanced footage was clearer, the details sharper, the colors more vibrant. But the man's face remained obscured, the interaction on the sofa still ambiguous. The frustration was mounting. "There's nothing else?" Ingrid asked, the disappointment heavy in her voice. "Let's review it frame by frame, Doctor," Thorne suggested, his voice calm, methodical. "Sometimes the devil is in the details. The smallest anomaly can break a case open." They began the painstaking process of analyzing the footage, one frame at a time. It was tedious work, the images blurring together in a monotonous loop. They scrutinized the background, the foreground, the shadows, the reflections. They were halfway through the footage when Dr. Thorne stopped. "Wait! Look there." He pointed to a spot on the screen near the edge of the frame. In the background of the costume room, there was a shiny metallic surface, a garment rack, polished chrome. As the camera panned slightly, the light caught the surface, creating a momentary, distorted reflection. "Can you zoom in on that?" Ingrid asked, her heart pounding. Dr. Thorne zoomed in, the image pixelating rapidly. He applied a filter to enhance the reflection, adjusting the levels to bring out the hidden details. But there, amidst the distortion, was a glimpse of the person holding the camera inside the closet. It was brief, barely a second long, but it was enough. The reflection showed a partial image of a face, obscured by the slats of the closet door. But more importantly, it showed details of the person's clothing. A distinctive patterned shirt, a paisley design, in shades of blue and green. The pattern was intricate, recognizable. And on the wrist, a specific type of wristwatch, a large chronograph style with a metal band. The watch was bulky, utilitarian, out of place in the glamorous world of the film industry. "Can you isolate that image?" "Print it out?" Ingrid asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Thorne nodded, printing out a high-resolution still of the reflection. It was grainy and distorted, but it was a lead, a tangible connection to the witness. Ingrid needed visual references of the crew. She needed to match the reflection to a face. She called Sylvia. "Sylvia? Do you have any behind-the-scenes photos from the production? Anything showing the crew?" "I might. The studio sent us a few candid shots during the early days of the training." "Before," Sylvia's voice trailed off. The unspoken "before the disappearance" hung heavy in the air. "I need them." Now. Ingrid drove back to Queens, the printed image burning a hole in her pocket. The adrenaline was surging through her veins, the thrill of the hunt rekindled. Sylvia was waiting for her, a stack of photos on the coffee table. They spread the photos out. Most of them were of the girls, smiling and rehearsing. But a few showed the crew members in the background, working on costumes, adjusting lights, interacting with the children. The photos were snapshots of a world moments before it shattered. Ingrid began the meticulous process of cross-referencing the photos with the reflection. She examined every face, every shirt, every wrist. She used a magnifying glass to scrutinize the details, the patterns, the shapes. The first pass yielded nothing. The second pass, the same. Ingrid's frustration grew. She was starting to think the reflection was a dead end, a cruel illusion created by the distorted light. Then she saw it. In one photo, standing in the background of the costume room, partially obscured by a rack of brightly colored dresses, was a man wearing a blue and green paisley shirt, the same intricate pattern from the reflection, and on his wrist a large chronograph wristwatch with a metal band, the same bulky utilitarian watch. The man was young, thin, with a nervous expression. He looked out of place, uncomfortable in the bustling environment of the production. He was identified in Sylvia's notes as a wardrobe assistant. His name was Warren Gentry. Ingrid stared at the photo, the face matching the distorted reflection in the video. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had found the witness. The ghost in the machine had a name. With a name, the hunt shifted focus. Warren Gentry. Ingrid started digging into his background, the initial search revealing a pattern of deliberate evasion. Warren had left the film industry shortly after the 1999 incident, his career trajectory abruptly ending. He had vanished from the radar, leaving almost no public footprint, no social media presence, no professional listings, no recent addresses. It was as if he had intentionally erased himself, retreating into a self-imposed exile. Ingrid used her investigative skills to track him down, the process requiring a deep dive into the hidden corners of public records. She scoured voter registrations, utility bills, vehicle registrations, and even court records, looking for any trace of Warren Gentry. It was a slow, frustrating process, navigating the bureaucracy of data privacy laws, the fragmented information creating a disjointed picture of a man living on the margins. She found a series of temporary addresses, P.O. boxes, and disconnected phone numbers. He had moved frequently, changing jobs, avoiding any connection to his past life. He was running, hiding. Finally, she found a lead. A utility bill in Warren Gentry's name linked to a rundown apartment building in a secluded neighborhood in Flushing, Queens. The building was a sprawling complex of identical brick buildings, the paint peeling, the walkways cracked. It was a far cry from the glamour of the film industry. It was a place where people went to disappear. Ingrid drove to the address, the anticipation tightening in her chest. She parked her car down the street, the neighborhood quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional passing car or the distant barking of a dog. She found Warren's apartment on the ground floor, the blinds drawn, the windows dark. She decided to observe the building, waiting for him to emerge. A direct confrontation might scare him off, sending him back into hiding. She needed to assess the situation, understand his state of mind. She settled in for a long wait, the hours ticking by, the monotony of the stakeout grueling. She watched the building, memorizing the entrances and exits, the patterns of the residents coming and going. Late in the afternoon, the door to Warren's apartment opened. A man stepped out. Ingrid recognized him instantly, even though he looked much older, frail and paranoid. His hair was thinning, his face gaunt, his eyes darting around nervously. The years of fear had taken their toll, transforming the young, nervous wardrobe assistant into a haunted, broken man. He was carrying a reusable grocery bag. He walked quickly, head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone he passed. His body language screamed fear, evasion. Ingrid waited until he reached the corner, then got out of her car and followed him. The hunt was on. He walked to a small grocery store a few blocks away. Ingrid followed him inside, browsing the aisles, keeping him in her peripheral vision. He moved nervously, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. He picked up a few items, his movements hurried, furtive. He paid for his groceries, cash only, and left the store. Ingrid waited a moment, then followed him out. She decided to confront him directly. There was no time for subtlety. The urgency of the case demanded action. "Warren Gentry?" Warren spun around, his eyes wide with fear. He recognized her name, perhaps from her 1999 reporting, or perhaps from the media coverage of the case. The recognition triggered a primal fear, a fight-or-flight response. He panicked. He dropped his grocery bag, the contents spilling onto the sidewalk, a carton of milk splitting open, the white liquid spreading like a stain. He turned and ran. Ingrid chased after him, the sudden burst of adrenaline overriding her exhaustion. Warren was surprisingly fast, fueled by terror. He darted across the street, dodging oncoming traffic, the horns blaring, the drivers shouting curses. Ingrid followed him, her heart pounding, her breath catching in her throat. She was not dressed for a foot chase, her boots slipping on the damp pavement. The distance between them widened, Warren's desperate flight propelled by a decade of fear. He turned into a narrow alleyway, a shortcut between two buildings. The alley was dark, cluttered with overflowing dumpsters and discarded furniture. The smell of garbage and decay hung heavy in the air. It was a mistake. The alley was a dead end, blocked by a high wooden fence. Ingrid cornered him, blocking the entrance to the alley. Warren was trapped, trembling and crying, his back pressed against the fence. He was cornered, desperate, the terror consuming him. "Warren, I'm not here to hurt you," Ingrid said, trying to catch her breath, her voice calm, reassuring. "Leave me alone!" "I don't know anything." Warren's voice was high-pitched, hysterical. He was shaking violently, his eyes wild with fear. "I didn't see anything. I didn't do anything." "I know you filmed the tape, Warren. I know you sent it to me." Ingrid approached him slowly, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "No, I didn't. I swear." He was clinging to the denial, the lie that had protected him for so long. Ingrid realized she was pushing too hard. He was terrified, paralyzed by the fear that had defined his life for the past decade. She needed to change tactics. She needed to break through the paranoia to reach the man buried beneath the fear. She pulled out the printed image of the reflection from her pocket, the paisley shirt, the wristwatch, the undeniable proof of his presence. "I know it was you, Warren." The paisley shirt, the wristwatch. "We found your reflection in the video." Warren stared at the image, his face paling. He recognized the proof. The denial crumbled, replaced by a profound despair. "Why did you send it to me, Warren? After all these years? Why now?" Warren hesitated, his fear warring with his conscience. Tears streamed down his face, carving paths through the grime on his cheeks. "I couldn't live with it anymore," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "The guilt. It was eating me alive. I saw their faces every night. I heard their voices." "Who was the man in the video, Warren? Who was with the girls?" Ingrid pressed gently, the crucial question hanging in the air. Warren shook his head, the terror returning to his eyes. "I can't. They'll kill me. They threatened me. They said they would destroy me." "They won't, Warren. I'll protect you, but you have to tell me the truth. You have to help me find them. You don't understand. These people, they're powerful. They're untouchable. They own this city. Tell me, Warren. For the girls, for Sylvia Valentine." The mention of Sylvia's name seemed to hit him hard. The guilt intensified, the weight of his silence becoming unbearable. He looked at Ingrid, his eyes pleading for understanding, for absolution. "I can't. Not here. Not now." The fear was still too strong, the trauma too deep. He pushed past her, scrambling out of the alleyway, and rushed back towards his apartment, disappearing into the anonymity of the crowded streets. Ingrid watched him go, her frustration warring with her sympathy. He was the key to the case, and he was terrified. She had to find a way to make him talk. She had to convince him that the truth was worth the risk. Ingrid returned to her car, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a throbbing headache. She had found the witness, but she was no closer to the truth. Warren was too scared to talk. She needed to find a way to convince him, to make him feel safe enough to confess. The challenge was immense. How do you protect someone from the untouchables? She drove back to her apartment, the traffic heavy, the city lights blurring together in a monotonous stream. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, analyzing Warren's reactions, his words, his fear. The paranoia was deeply ingrained, a defense mechanism developed over a decade of hiding. Late that night, her phone rang. A blocked number. Ingrid hesitated, the possibility of a threat crossing her mind. Then she answered, her grip tight on the phone. "Hello?" Silence. Then a trembling voice. "Miss, West Bay?" It was Warren. The relief washed over her. "Warren, I'm here. Are you safe?" "I don't know. I don't think so. They might be watching me." His voice was tight with paranoia, the fear amplified by the darkness. I need to talk to you, but not here. Not at my apartment." "Where?" "Name the place. I'll be there." "The waterfront. Near the old piers." In an hour he hung up before she could ask for the exact location. She knew where he meant. The desolate stretch of the waterfront in Queens, the abandoned piers decaying in the darkness, a place where ghosts lingered. She grabbed her coat and her bag, her heart pounding. This was it, the breakthrough she had been waiting for. She drove to the location, the streets deserted, the silence absolute. The waterfront was a graveyard of industrial decay, the air cold, smelling of salt and rust. The only light came from the distant city skyline, reflected in the dark water. She found Warren sitting on a bench, huddled in a thin jacket, his face obscured by the shadows. He was still trembling, constantly looking over his shoulder, his body tense, coiled like a spring. Ingrid sat down next to him, the silence stretching between them. She waited for him to speak, sensing his fragility, the precarious balance between confession and flight. "Thank you for coming, Warren." "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sound of the waves lapping against the shore. "If they find out—" "I know you're scared, Warren. But you did the right thing, sending me the tape, meeting me here." Warren nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I had to. I couldn't keep it hidden anymore. The guilt, it was suffocating me." He began to talk, his voice hesitant at first, then gaining momentum as the words poured out of him, a torrent of confession and regret, a decade of silence finally broken. He explained what happened that day. He was retrieving costumes from the wardrobe when the man and the girls entered the room. He recognized the man's voice, a powerful executive, and the sound triggered an instinctive fear. He hid in the closet, paralyzed by the realization of what he was witnessing. "I knew something was wrong," Warren said, his voice trembling. The way he talked to the girls, the way he looked at them, it felt inappropriate, predatory. I had my camera with me for continuity shots. I started filming. I don't know why. Instinct. He filmed the interaction on the sofa, the unsettling intimacy, the predatory undertones. He was terrified, but also compelled to document the wrongdoing. "I was too scared to come forward," he said, his voice choked with guilt. "I knew what they would do to me." Monolith shut everything down. NDAs, threats. They made it clear that if anyone talked, their lives would be over. "Who threatened you, Warren?" "Who orchestrated the cover-up?" Warren hesitated, the fear returning to his eyes. The names were the source of his terror, the embodiment of the power that had silenced him. "You have to tell me, Warren. Who was the man in the video?" Warren took a deep breath, the sound shuddering in the cold air. He looked at Ingrid, his eyes pleading for protection, for absolution. It was Arthur Sterling. The name hit Ingrid like a physical blow. Arthur Sterling, a top executive at Monolith Pictures, a powerful, respected figure in the film industry. The rumors she had heard, the suspicions she had harbored, finally confirmed. "Arthur Sterling?" Ingrid repeated, the implications staggering. "Yes, he was always around the set, watching the girls, giving them gifts. It was creepy, but everyone looked the other way. He was the boss. He controlled everything." "Was he alone? Was anyone else involved?" "No, he was often visited by his friend, Preston Blackwood. Preston Blackwood, another heavy hitter, a wealthy financier and industry mogul known for his lavish parties and his ruthless business practices. A man whose influence extended far beyond the film industry." "Blackwood was there too?" "Yes, they were always together. They were partners. They shared everything." The implication of everything hung heavy in the air, sickening, horrifying. "They were both there on the day the girls vanished," Warren continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw them leaving together." Shortly before the parents realized the girls were missing, Warren's confession hung in the air, the silence heavy with the weight of the revelation. Sterling and Blackwood, two of the most powerful men in New York. The scope of the conspiracy was suddenly much larger, much darker than Ingrid had imagined. This wasn't just a random abduction, it was a targeted operation, orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to be protecting the children and covered up by a system designed to protect the powerful. Ingrid now had the names, but proving their involvement would be a dangerous game. She was no longer just investigating a cold case. She was taking on the untouchables. The war had begun. Arthur Sterling and Preston Blackwood. The names echoed in Ingrid's mind, a drumbeat of impending conflict. She spent the next few days digging into their backgrounds, building a profile of the men she was about to confront. The research was extensive, delving into their financial dealings, their political connections, their personal lives. They were powerful, deeply embedded in New York's elite social circles, their names appearing in gossip columns and financial reports. Sterling was the face of Monolith Pictures, a charismatic executive known for his blockbuster hits and his philanthropic endeavors. His public image was carefully curated, a facade of success and respectability. Blackwood was the money behind the scenes, a ruthless financier with a vast portfolio of investments and a reputation for getting what he wanted. He was more elusive, operating in the shadows, his influence subtle but pervasive. He was protected by layers of lawyers, security, and influence. Taking them on would be a monumental task. The evidence she had, a grainy video, and the testimony of a terrified witness, was not enough to bring them down. She needed more. Ingrid knew she had to tread carefully. She needed to corroborate Warren's confession, to find evidence linking Sterling and Blackwood to the disappearance. But she also needed to rattle their cages, to force them to make a mistake, to make them react. She decided to contact Sterling directly, using her press credentials. It was a risky move, a declaration of war. She called his office at Monolith Pictures, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of assistants and publicists. "Mr. Sterling's office, how may I help you?" The assistant's voice was polite, professional. "This is Ingrid Westbay from the City Chronicle. I'm calling to request a comment from Mr. Sterling regarding the Starlight 5 case." The line went silent. The assistant seemed stunned by the audacity of the request. The name Ingrid Westbay still resonated with a faint echo of the scandal from a decade ago. "The Starlight 5 case?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "I believe that case is closed." "Yes, I have new evidence linking Mr. Sterling to the disappearance of the 5 girls in 1999. I'm offering him the opportunity to comment before we publish the story." I'll have to pass this along to our legal department. Mr. Sterling has no comment." The line went dead. Ingrid hung up the phone, her heart pounding. The first shot had been fired. The pushback was immediate, overwhelming. Within hours, her editor, Dave Riggins, received a call from Monolith Pictures' legal team. Ingrid watched as Dave's face turned pale, his voice strained as he listened to the threats. He scribbled notes on a legal pad, the pen shaking in his hand. He hung up the phone and turned to Ingrid, his expression grim. That was Monolith's lawyers. They threatened a massive defamation lawsuit if we publish anything related to Sterling or the case. They said they would bury us in litigation, bankrupt the paper. They also mentioned your history, Ingrid, your previous reporting on the case. They said they would use it to discredit you, to paint you as a vengeful, obsessed reporter with a personal vendetta. "We knew this would happen, Dave." "It means we're getting close." "Knowing it and facing it are two different things, Ingrid. We can't afford a lawsuit. We barely make payroll as it is. This paper is hanging by a thread." "We have the truth on our side, Dave. We have a witness. A witness who is too scared to go on the record." "We have nothing, Ingrid. Nothing but a grainy video and a lot of accusations. It's not enough. Not yet." Dave told her to drop the story, to focus on the zoning variances, the community gardens, the safe, mundane news, the familiar refrain of caution, of self-preservation. Ingrid refused. She knew she was on her own. That evening, as she left the newsroom, the streets dark and slick with rain, she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder. A dark sedan was parked across the street, the engine running, the headlights off. The silhouette of the driver was visible behind the tinted windows. She started walking, her pace quickening. The sedan pulled out from the curb and began to follow her, slowly, deliberately. She turned a corner, hoping to lose the tail. The sedan turned after her, the engine roaring in the narrow street. She realized this wasn't just surveillance, it was intimidation, a demonstration of power. She reached her car and quickly unlocked the door, sliding into the driver's seat. She locked the doors, her hands trembling. The sedan pulled up behind her, blocking her in. The headlights flashed in her rearview mirror, blinding her. She started the engine and pulled out, the tires screeching on the wet pavement. The sedan followed, aggressively tailgating her, the proximity menacing. A chase ensued through the crowded streets of Manhattan. Ingrid weaved through traffic, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the adrenaline surging through her veins. The sedan matched her every move, the driver skilled and relentless. They were not trying to stop her, they were trying to terrify her. She managed to lose the tail in the maze of one-way streets in the West Village, pulling into a dark alleyway and cutting her headlights. The sedan roared past, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Ingrid sat in the darkness, her heart pounding, her breath catching in her throat. The message was clear. She was being watched, threatened, and intimidated. Sterling and Blackwood were not just powerful, they were dangerous, and they were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. Shaken by the car chase, Ingrid knew she couldn't keep the evidence in her apartment. The vulnerability of her situation was starkly clear. The tape, the digitized copies, Warren's confession, which she had recorded on a hidden digital recorder, it was all at risk. The next morning, she went to her bank and rented a safety deposit box located in the vault, the most secure section of the bank. She placed the original Hi8 tape, the digitized copies on a hard drive, and her notes on Warren's confession inside the metal box, the heavy door clicking shut with a reassuring finality. She felt a small measure of relief, knowing the evidence was safe from physical theft. She called Warren using a burner phone she had purchased that morning. She knew her own phone might be compromised. "Warren, it's Ingrid. They are watching me. They followed me last night. You need to be careful. They might be watching you too." Warren's response was panicked, hysterical. "I knew it! I knew this would happen. They are going to kill me." "Warren, listen to me. You need to get out of your apartment. Go somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find you." "Where? Where can I go? They have eyes everywhere." "Do you have family, friends, anyone you can trust?" Warren hesitated. "My sister. She lives upstate, but I haven't talked to her in years." "Call her. Go there. Now. And don't contact me until I contact you. I'll find a safe way to communicate." She hung up, hoping he would heed her warning. The danger was escalating, the threat becoming more tangible. She spent the rest of the day working on the story, trying to find corroborating evidence, something that would convince Dave to publish, something that would force the police to act. She worked from the newsroom, the bustling environment providing a semblance of safety. She returned to her apartment late that evening, the exhaustion weighing her down. The street was quiet, the dark sedan nowhere in sight. But the sense of unease persisted. As she reached her door, she noticed something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar. The lock was damaged, the metal scratched and dented. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in the silence. The apartment had been tossed, but it wasn't a random burglary. It was a professional search. Meticulous, calculated. Drawers were pulled out, but the contents were neatly stacked. Closets were open, but the clothes were still on the hangers. The cushions on the sofa were unzipped, the stuffing examined. They were looking for something specific. The evidence? She walked through the apartment, the silence amplifying the sense of violation. The air felt tainted, the space contaminated by their presence. Her electronics had been examined, the television, the stereo, the computer. She went to her desk where she kept her research files. They were gone, the physical files on the Starlight 5 case, the notes from Sylvia, the reconstructed crew list, all gone. She checked her computer. The hard drive had been professionally wiped. Everything was gone. The operating system, the applications, the data. A blank slate. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The break-in confirmed that Sterling and Blackwood were actively trying to stop her. They knew what she had, or at least what she was looking for, and they were willing to do anything to keep it hidden. The stakes had raised significantly. They were no longer just threatening her. They were actively interfering with her investigation. They were obstructing justice. She called Detective Thorne. "Thorne." His voice was gruff, tired. "Detective, it's Ingrid Westbay. My apartment was broken into. Are you okay? Did you see anyone?" The concern in his voice was genuine, surprising her. "I'm fine." "They're gone. But they took my research files, the Starlight 5 case." "Did they take anything else?" "Valuables?" "No, just the files, and they wiped my computer. It was a professional job. Clean, efficient." "I'll send a team over." "Don't touch anything." Thorne arrived an hour later, the crime scene unit dusting for prints, taking photographs. The process was invasive, sterile, a bureaucratic response to a personal violation. Thorne listened to Ingrid's account of the break-in, his expression grim. "You rattled their cages," he said, his voice low. "I know who they are, Detective. Arthur Sterling and Preston Blackwood. My witness identified them." Thorne nodded slowly. "Sterling and Blackwood. Heavy hitters. This complicates things." "They're trying to silence me, Detective. Just like they did 10 years ago. They are covering up a crime. A horrific crime." "I know. But we still need proof. We need something concrete linking them to the disappearance. The break-in is proof it's obstruction of justice. It's circumstantial. We can't prove they were behind it. They are too smart to leave a trail." Ingrid's frustration boiled over. "So what now? We just wait for them to make another move? To come after me again? Or Warren? What if they find him?" Thorne hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He glanced around the apartment, making sure they were alone. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I might have something," he said, "but it's off the record. Completely off the record." Detective Marcus Thorne sat at his desk in the cold case squad, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting a sickly yellow hue over the piles of folders cluttering his workspace. The squad room was quiet, the night shift settling in, the city outside the windows a distant murmur. He was troubled by Ingrid Westbay's report of the break-in. It suggested a sophisticated operation, far beyond the capabilities of a common burglar. It lent credence to her claims about Sterling and Blackwood, transforming her crusade from a journalistic obsession into a potential active threat. He knew the risks of investigating them. They were powerful, connected, capable of destroying careers and reputations with a single phone call. The political fallout would be immense, but the thought of 5 missing girls, the image of Sylvia Valentine's grief-stricken face he remembered from the initial investigation, the possibility of a massive cover-up spanning a decade, it gnawed at his conscience. He couldn't ignore it, not anymore. He decided to begin a discreet investigation off the record. He couldn't use official channels, couldn't request warrants or interviews. He had to rely on his instincts, his contacts, and his access to the restricted databases that held the city's darkest secrets. He began by accessing the intelligence databases, looking for any connection between Sterling and Blackwood and other illicit activities. He searched for rumors, allegations, anything that suggested a pattern of behavior, a hidden darkness beneath the polished facade. The initial searches yielded nothing. Sterling and Blackwood were clean, their records spotless, their reputations pristine. They were ghosts in the system. But Thorne knew that powerful men rarely left a trail. They used intermediaries, shell corporations, lawyers to do their dirty work. He had to dig deeper into the dark corners of the intelligence world where rumors and speculation were the currency. He reached out to a contact in the Vice Squad, a detective named Mike Sanchez who specialized in high-end prostitution and illicit gambling rings. Sanchez operated in the shadows, navigating the murky waters of the city's elite underworld. They met in a dimly lit bar in the meatpacking district, the kind of place where deals were made and secrets were traded over expensive whiskey. "What do you have on Sterling and Blackwood?" Thorne asked, cutting straight to the chase. Sanchez hesitated, swirling the ice in his glass. He looked around the bar, making sure they were not being observed. "They're clean, officially, but there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "The dark kind. The kind that don't see the light of day. The kind that get you killed if you repeat them." Sanchez leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He spoke of an exclusive underground ring among New York elites, a ring involving illicit videos catering to specific dark tastes. Videos featuring children. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "And Blackwood," Thorne pressed, a cold dread spreading through him. "His name appears in the periphery of these rumors. Never directly linked, but always lurking in the shadows. He's known to have exotic tastes. He attends private parties, exclusive gatherings, where these videos are shown, traded." The revelation hit Thorne like a cold wave. The scope of the case might be much larger, much more horrific than a simple abduction. The Starlight Five. 5 young girls, aspiring actresses, the perfect targets. If the girls were still alive, now young women, they might have been subjected to systematic abuse for a decade. Filmed, exploited, traded like commodities. The crime was ongoing. Thorne realized the urgency of the situation. He couldn't wait for official channels. He had to act. The bureaucracy, the political constraints, the fear of retaliation, it all seemed insignificant in the face of such monstrous evil. He decided to offer unofficial assistance to Ingrid. She was reckless, impulsive, but she was also determined, resourceful, and she had the witness. She was the only one willing to fight this war. He called her, arranging a discreet meeting. He had to tell her the truth, the horrifying truth. The darkness they were facing was deeper, more pervasive than she could ever imagine. Thorne met Ingrid in the same diner in the meatpacking district, the late-night crowd providing cover for their clandestine conversation. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and unspoken fears. He laid out his findings, the rumors surrounding Blackwood, the illicit video ring, the whispers of exotic tastes. He shared the fragmented intelligence reports, heavily redacted, the official language sterile and detached, masking the underlying horror. Ingrid listened in silence, her face pale, her coffee growing cold. The implications were staggering. The abduction, the cover-up, the decade of silence. It all made sense now, a horrifying logic emerging from the chaos. "You think the girls are still alive?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. The hope was agonizing, the possibility terrifying. "I don't know, but if they are, it's worse than we imagined." The horror of the realization settled in Ingrid's stomach. If the girls were still alive, they would be young women now, around 20 or 21. They might have been subjected to systematic abuse for 10 years, filmed, exploited, traded like commodities. The thought was sickening, overwhelming. The crime wasn't just in the past, it was happening now. "We have to find them," Ingrid said, her voice firm, a new sense of urgency stealing her resolve. The journalistic pursuit of truth had transformed into a desperate rescue mission. "How?" "We have no leads, no evidence. The rumors are not enough for a warrant. If they were kept alive, they would need a secluded location. A place where they could be hidden, controlled. A prison. A prison disguised as a home." Exactly. And Blackwood, the wealthier of the two, likely owns such a location. He has the resources, the connections to maintain such a facility. Ingrid's mind raced, the pieces clicking into place. The property portfolio. That was the key. "We need to search Blackwood's real estate holdings. Everything he owns, everything he controls." "That's not easy." Men like Blackwood hide their assets behind shell companies, offshore accounts. The trail is deliberately obscured. I know, but I know how to find them. I have contacts in forensic accounting, people who specialize in tracing hidden assets. Ingrid returned to her apartment, the ransacked rooms a stark reminder of the danger she was in. She borrowed a laptop from Dave, promising to return it in one piece. She set up a secure connection, using encryption software to protect her research. She began a massive search of Blackwood's real estate portfolio, navigating the complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts used to hide his assets. It was painstaking work, requiring specialized knowledge of financial databases and investigative techniques. She called in favors, leveraged old contacts, pushing the boundaries of legality to access the information she needed. She worked through the night, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, the hours blurring together in a monotonous stream of data. She traced the money, followed the paper trail, uncovering the hidden layers of Blackwood's empire. The complexity of the financial structures was staggering, a testament to Blackwood's paranoia and his determination to remain invisible. She focused on properties acquired around 1999 or shortly after, looking for anomalies, inconsistencies, anything that suggested a hidden purpose. The list was long. Blackwood owned properties all over the world, penthouses in London, villas in the Caribbean, ranches in Montana. But Ingrid focused on locations within a few hours' drive of New York City, a place where Blackwood and Sterling could easily access their captives, maintain control over their horrific operation. The search was grueling, the dead ends mounting, the frustration growing. But Ingrid persisted, driven by the horrifying possibility that the girls were still alive, still suffering. She was no longer just investigating a story. She was racing against time. The lives of the Starlight Five depended on her ability to navigate the labyrinth of Blackwood's hidden empire. By the second day of the search, Ingrid had identified several isolated properties in upstate New York, hidden behind layers of shell corporations and trusts. The ownership was murky, the connections tenuous, but the pattern was clear. Blackwood was the ultimate beneficiary. The forensic accountant she had contacted, a man named Kenji Tanaka, confirmed her findings. The financial structures are designed to create maximum opacity, Kenji explained over a secure line. But the money trail always leads back to Blackwood. She began the systematic process of researching each property, looking for anomalies that would suggest a hidden purpose. She scrutinized the property records, the building permits, the utility bills, looking for anything out of the ordinary. The first property was a hunting lodge in the Adirondacks. It was remote, secluded, but the records showed it was frequently used for corporate retreats and hunting trips. Too much traffic, too many witnesses. The utility bills were low, consistent with occasional use. The second property was a sprawling estate on the Long Island Sound. It was luxurious, opulent, but the security was minimal, the location too exposed. The social pages frequently mentioned Blackwood hosting lavish parties at the estate, not a place to hide captives. The third property caught her attention. A large, secluded villa deep in the Hudson Valley, acquired through a shell corporation in late 1999, shortly after the girls disappeared. The location was perfect, remote, hidden by dense woods, accessible only by a long, winding private road. The nearest town was miles away, the silence absolute. She dug deeper into the property records, looking for details of the renovations, the utilities, the security upgrades. Kenji used his access to restricted databases to pull the building permits filed with the local county office. The anomalies were striking. Immediately after the purchase, the property underwent extensive renovations. The permits detailed soundproofing installations in the East Wing, a specialized HVAC system designed for climate control and air filtration, and high-end security upgrades, including motion sensors, surveillance cameras, and a reinforced perimeter fence. These are not typical renovations for a country retreat, Kenji observed, his voice tight with concern. "This is the kind of security you would expect in a fortress, a secure facility." Then they looked at the utility bills. They were unusually high for a property that appeared rarely occupied. The electricity consumption was astronomical, suggesting specialized equipment, perhaps cameras, servers, extensive lighting, climate control. "The usage is constant, 24/7, even during the winter months when the villa is supposedly vacant," Kenji pointed out. "Someone is living there. Someone is using a lot of power." The pieces fit together, forming a chilling picture. The secluded location, the extensive security, the unusual utility usage. It was the perfect prison. Ingrid's heart pounded, a mix of excitement and dread. She had found the location. She was sure of it. The anomaly was too significant to ignore. But proving it was another matter. She couldn't just call Thorne and tell him she had a hunch. She needed proof, concrete evidence. She looked at the map, the location of the villa glowing on the screen. It was a 3-hour drive from the city. She made a decision. She had to go there. She had to see it for herself. She packed a bag, a digital camera with a telephoto lens, binoculars, warm clothing, a burner phone. She knew the risks. She was walking into the lion's den, but she had no choice. If the girls were there, she had to find them. The abstract investigation had become a tangible reality. The darkness had a location. The drive upstate was a blur of autumn colors, the trees ablaze in shades of red and orange. The beauty of the landscape was a stark contrast to the darkness of her mission. Ingrid barely noticed the scenery. Her mind was focused on the destination, the secluded villa in the Hudson Valley. She arrived late in the afternoon, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. She found the private road leading to the villa, marked by a discreet sign. Private property. No trespassing. The warning was clear, ominous. She parked her car off the main road, hidden by the dense woods, and proceeded on foot. The air was cold, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under her boots. The woods were thick, the terrain rugged. She moved carefully, deliberately, aware of the danger surrounding her. She reached the perimeter of the property. It was surrounded by a high stone wall, topped with barbed wire. The security was evident. Cameras mounted on the wall, their lenses glinting in the fading light, motion sensors embedded in the ground. It was a fortress designed to keep people out, and perhaps to keep people in. She realized she couldn't approach the villa directly. She needed a vantage point, a place where she could observe the property without being detected. She found a nearby hill overlooking the villa, the trees providing cover. She settled in, the ground cold and damp, and began her stakeout. She pulled out her binoculars, the lenses focusing on the villa below. The villa was large, sprawling, built of stone and glass. It was modern, luxurious, but also imposing, fortress-like. The lights were on, illuminating the interior, but the windows were tinted, obscuring the view. She watched the property for hours, the darkness settling in, the temperature dropping. The villa seemed quiet, peaceful, but the silence was deceptive. It was the silence of a predator waiting for its prey. She observed the security measures. There were 2 guards she could identify, doing rounds every couple of hours. Their patrols seemed routine, predictable, the movements of men who had been doing the same route for years without incident. By midnight, she noticed their vigilance dropping. One guard spent long periods in the security booth near the main gate, the glow of what looked like a television or phone screen visible through the window. The other made increasingly sporadic rounds, sometimes disappearing for 45 minutes at a time. Not the military precision she'd expected from such a wealthy owner. Perhaps Blackwood had grown complacent after a decade without problems. Ingrid documented everything, taking photographs with her telephoto lens, making notes of the routines, the blind spots in the security system. She analyzed the patterns, looking for vulnerabilities, for opportunities. Late in the evening, a car approached the villa. A luxury sedan, black and sleek. It stopped at the gate, the driver entering a code on the keypad. The gate opened and the car disappeared inside the compound. Ingrid zoomed in with her binoculars, trying to identify the driver. The distance was too great, the light too dim. But a few minutes later, the front door of the villa opened. A man stepped out, illuminated by the porch light. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the darkness as if surveying his kingdom. Ingrid recognized him instantly. It was Arthur Sterling. The confirmation hit her like a jolt of electricity. Sterling was here, at the secluded villa, the fortress hidden in the woods. The connection was confirmed. The suspicion solidified into certainty. If Sterling was here, the girls might be here too. The realization sent a chill down her spine, overriding the cold of the night. The hunt was on. The prey was located. Now she just had to find a way to get inside. Ingrid spent the night on the hill, huddled in her sleeping bag, the cold seeping into her bones. Sleep was impossible, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The image of Arthur Sterling burned into her mind. She woke at dawn, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange, the air crisp and cold. The beauty of the sunrise was lost on her, the landscape transformed into a battlefield. She resumed her surveillance, her eyes fixed on the villa, the binoculars pressed against her face. The property was quiet in the early morning light. The security patrols continued, the guards changing shifts with mechanical precision. The routine was monotonous, predictable. She focused her attention on the east wing of the villa, the wing that had been soundproofed, reinforced. The windows in this wing seemed different from the rest of the house, tinted darker, perhaps even mirrored. They were opaque, impenetrable. She watched the windows for hours, hoping for a glimpse of movement, a sign of life. The morning dragged on. Nothing happened. Ingrid's frustration grew. She began to doubt her instincts, the certainty that had propelled her here. What if she was wrong? What if the villa was empty? But she persisted, driven by the horrifying possibility that the girls were inside, trapped in that fortress, their lives suspended in time. As dusk approached, the light shifting, the shadows lengthening, the angle of the sun changing, she saw it. Movement. Through a large window in the east wing. Ingrid zoomed in, her heart pounding. The image was blurry, distorted by the distance and the tinted glass. She adjusted the focus, her hands trembling. But she saw a figure, a young woman. She was standing near the window, her silhouette outlined against the interior light. She was thin, frail, dressed in a simple white gown. Her hair was long, dark, hanging limply down her back. Ingrid's breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. After all these years. The woman moved strangely, almost robotically, her movements stiff, unnatural. She stared blankly ahead, her expression vacant, devoid of emotion. She looked like a ghost, a broken doll trapped in a glass cage. Ingrid watched her for several minutes, the silence amplifying the sound of her own heartbeat. The woman didn't move, didn't react, didn't seem aware of her surroundings. She was there, but not present. The horrifying realization struck Ingrid with the force of a physical blow. The girls were still alive, held captive in the villa for 10 years. The shock was overwhelming. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. The image of the vacant young woman, trapped in that sterile prison, was burned into her mind. The confirmation of their survival was immediately overshadowed by the horror of their condition. She had found them. But they were not the smiling, vibrant girls from the photographs. They were shadows of their former selves, their spirits broken, their minds shattered. The horror of the discovery was paralyzing, but it also ignited a fire within her, a fierce determination to rescue them, to expose the monsters who had stolen their lives. She knew she couldn't just walk away. She had to act. Now. The abstract investigation had become a desperate rescue mission. The time for caution was over. Ingrid scrambled down the hill, her movements fueled by adrenaline and urgency. The darkness provided cover, but also amplified the sense of danger. She reached her car and grabbed her phone, her hands trembling. She called Detective Thorne. The phone rang several times before he answered. "Thorne." His voice was gruff, alert. "Detective." "It's Ingrid. I found them. They're alive." Her voice was breathless, strained. "What? Where are you? Are you safe?" "Upstate. Hudson Valley. A secluded villa owned by Blackwood. I saw one of the girls. Through the window." "Are you sure? Did you get a photo? Evidence?" "The distance was too great. The image is blurry, but I'm sure, Detective, it was her, and Thorne, their condition. It's bad. They looked broken." "Okay, stay where you are. I'm mobilizing a team. We're coming in." "No, you don't understand. The security here is insane. Armed guards, cameras, motion sensors, a fortress. If they see you coming, they'll kill them. They'll destroy the evidence. Sterling is here. He's inside." "Ingrid, listen to me. Do not approach the villa. Wait for backup." "That's an order." "We don't have time, Detective." "We need to act now. Every second counts." "We need a warrant, Ingrid." "We can't just go in guns blazing based on your observation alone. We need concrete proof of life and ongoing criminal activity inside the villa. You know the rules. We have to do this by the book." The legal obstacle hit Ingrid like a brick wall. Thorne was right. They couldn't get a warrant without evidence. And getting that evidence required breaking the law. The system was designed to protect the powerful even at the expense of the innocent. The dilemma was agonizing. If she waited for backup, the girls might disappear again, this time forever. If she went in alone, she might get caught, or worse. The risks were immense. But the image of the vacant young woman, the thought of the decade of abuse, the realization of the ongoing crime, it made the decision for her. The moral imperative overrode the legal constraints. She couldn't wait. She had to infiltrate the villa herself, to get the proof Thorne needed, to rescue them. "Detective, I'm going in." "Ingrid, don't. It's too dangerous. You're a reporter, not a tactical officer." "I have to. If you don't hear from me in an hour, send the cavalry." She hung up before Thorne could argue. She knew the risks. She accepted them. She prepared her equipment, a small digital camera, high resolution, capable of recording in low light, a flashlight, tools to bypass security, lockpicks, wire cutters. She checked the batteries, the memory card. Her hands were steady, her resolve firm. She sent a final distress message to Thorne, her location, a brief summary of the situation. Hoping he would monitor the situation, hoping he would come if things went wrong. A lifeline in the darkness. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. She looked at the villa, the fortress looming in the darkness, the lights flickering like predatory eyes. It was time to walk into the lion's den. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination. She was going to bring them home. Under the cover of darkness, Ingrid approached the villa grounds. The silence was absolute, the air heavy with anticipation. The moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, the darkness offering a fragile protection. She moved stealthily through the woods, the adrenaline sharpening her senses, heightening her awareness of every sound, every shadow. She used her observations from the stakeout to navigate the blind spots in the security system. The cameras had a limited range of motion, their lenses sweeping the perimeter in a predictable pattern. The motion sensors were concentrated near the entrances, the open lawns. She found the weak point in the perimeter fence she had identified earlier, a section hidden by dense bushes where the stone wall was lower, the barbed wire missing. She used wire cutters to cut through the chain-link fence hidden behind the bushes, the metal snapping quietly in the silence. Every sound seemed amplified, a potential betrayal. She slipped through the opening and found herself inside the compound. The grounds were immaculate, the lawns manicured, the trees sculpted. The beauty was sterile, cold, menacing. A facade of normalcy masking the underlying horror. She moved quickly across the open space, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the pools of light cast by the security lamps. The tension was excruciating, a tightrope walk between survival and discovery. She had timed her entry for 3 a.m., the dead hour when even security guards struggle to stay alert. From her surveillance, she knew only 2 guards worked the night shift, and by now, one was likely in the booth by the gate, the other probably taking an extended break, somewhere warm. She reached the villa, the stone walls towering above her. She circled the building, looking for a way in. The doors were reinforced steel, the windows barred. The fortress was designed to be impenetrable. She found the service entrance near the east wing, the wing where she had seen the movement. It was a small, unassuming door hidden behind a trellis of climbing roses. The irony of the roses, a symbol of beauty and love, masking the entrance to a prison, was not lost on her. She examined the lock. It was a high-end electronic keypad requiring a code or a key card. She didn't have either. She pulled out her lock-picking tools, the thin metal instruments feeling cold in her trembling hands. She looked for the mechanical override, a hidden keyhole that should be beneath the keypad. But as she examined the door more closely, she noticed something else. The door frame was slightly warped, old wood that had settled over the years. When she pushed against the door while lifting the handle, she felt give. The electronic lock was functioning, but the physical latch wasn't fully engaging with the strike plate. It was a common problem in older buildings where new electronic systems had been retrofitted onto existing structures. The expensive electronic lock was perfect, but the old doorframe had betrayed it. With careful manipulation, steady pressure at just the right angle while lifting the handle, she worked the door back and forth. After several tense minutes, she felt the latch slip free. The door popped open without triggering the electronic alarm. Pure luck. She knew it. Without this flaw, her infiltration would have ended here. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the realization of how close she'd come to failure. She slipped inside, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The sound was final, sealing her fate. The interior was opulent but sterile. Marble floors, modern art, expensive furniture. The air was warm, climate-controlled, smelling faintly of expensive cleaning products and something else, something metallic, antiseptic, a hospital smell. She moved through the utility corridors, the walls lined with pipes and conduits. The space was narrow, claustrophobic. She followed the corridor towards the east wing, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. She was getting closer. The anticipation was agonizing. She reached the east wing. The atmosphere changed abruptly. It felt colder, more controlled, the silence heavier. She found a heavy, soundproof door separating this section from the rest of the house. It was locked. This lock was older, mechanical. She could work with this. She picked it carefully, the mechanism clicking open after a few minutes of careful work. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The darkness beyond was absolute, impenetrable. The silence was profound. She found herself in a long hallway, the walls bare, the floor lined with soft carpet, muffling her footsteps. The hallway was dimly lit by small LED lights embedded in the floor, casting an eerie glow. Several doors lined the hall, identical, unmarked. They looked like cells. The silence was unnerving. The air was still, sterile, the atmosphere oppressive. She approached the first door. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. She didn't know what she would find inside. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the determination propelled her forward. She opened the door. The room was small, windowless, illuminated by soft, recessed lighting. It was decently furnished. A bed, a dresser, a chair. Not a dungeon, but stark, sterile. A gilded cage. In the center of the room, sitting on the chair, was a young woman. Ingrid recognized her instantly, even though she was much older, her face gaunt, her eyes vacant. It was Talia Shapiro. Ingrid's breath caught in her throat. The shock of seeing her, alive, after all these years, was overwhelming. The relief was immediately overshadowed by the horror of her condition. "Talia," she whispered, her voice trembling. Talia didn't react. She stared blankly ahead, her eyes unfocused, unresponsive to Ingrid's presence. She seemed heavily traumatized, brainwashed, disconnected from reality. She was a ghost, a shadow of the vibrant girl from the photographs. Ingrid approached her slowly, her heart aching with a mixture of relief and horror. "Talia, I'm here to help you. I'm here to get you out." Talia didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared. The silence was devastating. Ingrid looked around the room, her eyes falling on the corners, near the ceiling. High-tech cameras, mounted on the walls, recording 24/7. The lenses were small, black, predatory eyes, watching everything. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The cameras? The illicit video ring? The rumors? It was true. The horrifying truth was worse than she had imagined. She checked the other rooms. In the second room, she found Jessica Rowan. She was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her body rigid, her movements robotic. The same cameras, the same vacant expression. In the third room, Kira Valentine, Sylvia's daughter. She was pacing the room, her movements repetitive, obsessive. She was whispering to herself, the words indistinct, incoherent. The trauma, the years of captivity, the systematic abuse had shattered their minds. They were brainwashed, catatonic, lost in a world of their own making. 3 of the Starlight 5, alive but broken. She looked for the other 2, Calla Valentine and Zariah Ocampo. Their rooms were empty. The realization sent a chill down her spine. What happened to them? She needed to find the control room, the place where the footage was recorded, stored, distributed, the heart of the operation. She found it at the end of the hallway, a room filled with monitors, servers, high-tech equipment. The monitors displayed live feeds from the rooms, the girls visible on the screens, their silent suffering broadcast to the world. The servers were humming, storing vast amounts of footage, terabytes of data, years of abuse, exploitation, torture, meticulously catalogued, categorized. Ingrid realized the horrifying truth. The girls had been filmed continuously for a decade, their abuse distributed to a network of wealthy clients in the film industry and private circles. The scale of the operation was staggering, the depravity unimaginable. It was a massive operation, sophisticated, organized, evil. She had found the proof. But she had also found a nightmare. The darkness was deeper, more pervasive than she had ever imagined. Ingrid raised her camera and started recording. The control room, the live feeds, the servers, the names on the distribution lists visible on one of the monitors. A list of the wealthy and powerful clients who fueled this horrific enterprise. She documented everything, her movements quick, efficient, fueled by a cold fury. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. She needed to get this evidence out, to Thorne, to the world. She was about to leave the control room when she heard it. A faint sound, a beep, coming from one of the consoles. A small red light blinking on the security panel. She had triggered a silent sensor. An alarm suddenly blared, the sound deafening in the confined space, the red lights flashing, bathing the room in a hellish glow. The sound was piercing, disorienting, paralyzing. They knew she was here. Ingrid's heart leapt into her throat. She grabbed the memory card from her camera, the small plastic chip containing the proof of the nightmare. She couldn't afford to lose it. She ran out of the control room, into the hallway. They were waiting for her. Preston Blackwood and Arthur Sterling, standing at the end of the hallway blocking her exit. Their expressions were furious, their eyes burning with rage. Blackwood was holding a gun, but his grip was awkward, unpracticed, the weapon of a man who owned guns for show but rarely held them. His hand was shaking slightly, the barrel wavering. Sterling was holding a phone, his face contorted in panic. "You shouldn't have come here, Miss." "West Bay," Blackwood said, his voice trying for calm but betraying a tremor of uncertainty. "It's over. The police are on their way." Ingrid's voice was surprisingly steady, despite the terror coursing through her veins. Sterling laughed nervously. "The police?" We own the police. We own this town. But his voice lacked conviction. They were rattled by the sudden intrusion, unprepared for actual confrontation. They advanced towards her slowly, uncertainly. These were men who destroyed lives through lawyers and money, not violence. They were out of their element. "You think you can expose us?" Blackwood sneered, trying to steady his grip on the gun. "The girls. What did you do to them? Calla and Zariah. Where are they?" "We gave them a purpose. We made them stars." Sterling's voice was laced with a sickening pride. "Calla and Zariah were weak. They couldn't handle the pressure. They are gone. You destroyed their lives. Their lives were meaningless before us. We gave them meaning. We gave them immortality. They were monsters, devoid of empathy, of humanity. Their delusion was absolute. Ingrid realized she couldn't fight them. She had to escape. With the evidence. She made a desperate move. She turned and ran back towards the control room. She slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. The heavy metal door provided a temporary barrier. Blackwood and Sterling pounded on the door, the sound echoing in the small room. The metal dented under the force of their blows. She looked around the control room, searching for an escape route. A window? A vent? There was nothing. She was trapped. The room was a cage, just like the girls' rooms. The door splintered, the lock breaking. She had to create a diversion. She grabbed a chair and smashed the control panel monitors, the glass shattering, the sparks flying. The live feeds went dead. The servers shut down, the sudden power surge triggering the fire suppression system. A thick white foam sprayed from the ceiling, covering the equipment, the floor, everything. The alarm intensified, the sound piercing, disorienting. The door burst open. Blackwood and Sterling stormed into the room, immediately slipping on the foam-covered floor. Blackwood's arms windmilled as he tried to maintain balance, the gun firing once into the ceiling as he fell. Sterling crashed into a server rack, cursing. Ingrid used the chaos to her advantage. She scrambled past them as they struggled to stand on the slippery foam. Blackwood tried to aim from the floor, but couldn't get a clear shot through the thick foam still spraying from above. She ran out of the control room into the hallway. A chaotic chase ensued through the villa. Ingrid ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, the adrenaline surging through her veins. Behind her, she could hear them struggling, slipping, cursing. The foam had bought her precious seconds. She navigated the maze of corridors, using her memory of the utility passages. She could hear Sterling shouting into his phone, trying to alert the guards, but the alarm was so loud his words were incomprehensible. She reached the service entrance. The door was locked from the inside now. The electronic keypad was dead, shorted out by the fire suppression system's activation. She grabbed a heavy bronze sculpture from a nearby pedestal and smashed it against the door handle repeatedly. The old wood around the faulty frame splintered. On the fourth blow, the door burst open. She ran out into the cold night air. She sprinted across the lawn, towards the perimeter fence, the woods offering the promise of safety. Blackwood appeared at the doorway behind her, trying to aim. He fired twice, but his inexperience showed. Both shots went wide, one hitting a tree 30 feet to her left, the other disappearing into the darkness. She kept running, pushing herself beyond her limits, the fear propelling her forward. She reached the perimeter fence, diving through the opening she had cut earlier. The metal tore at her clothes, scratching her skin. She ran into the woods, the darkness enveloping her. Behind her, she could hear confused shouting. The guards had finally responded, but were disoriented by the chaos. Sterling screaming contradictory orders, Blackwood still trying to pursue despite being covered in foam. As she reached the main road, she saw them. Flashing lights, police cars racing toward the main gate of the villa. Thorne. He had come. She collapsed onto the ground by the roadside, her body trembling, the memory card clutched in her hand. She had made it. Through sheer luck, desperation, and her opponent's complete unpreparedness for physical confrontation, she had survived. Sylvia Valentine was jolted awake by the ringing phone. The sound was jarring, intrusive, a violation of the fragile peace of the night. She glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Her heart pounded in her chest. Calls in the middle of the night never brought good news. The familiar dread washed over her, the anticipation of another disappointment, another dead end. She picked up the phone, her hand trembling. "Hello? Mrs. Valentine? This is Detective Marcus Thorne." Sylvia's breath caught in her throat. Thorne. The detective who had dismissed Ingrid's evidence. "Detective! What is it? What's happened?" "We found them, Mrs. Valentine," Thorne said, his voice gentle but firm. "We found the girls. Kira is alive." The words hung in the air, surreal, unbelievable. Alive. After 10 years. The word echoed in her mind, a miracle emerging from the darkness. Sylvia couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face, silent sobs racking her body. The relief was overwhelming, paralyzing. "Mrs. Valentine, are you there?" "Alive," she whispered, the word tasting like a foreign language. "They're upstate, at a property in the Hudson Valley. We're bringing them to the hospital. I'll send a car to pick you up." The drive upstate was a blur. Sylvia sat in the back of the police car, the city lights blurring past the window. Her mind was racing, her heart aching with a mixture of hope and fear. What condition would Kira be in? What had they done to her? She arrived at the estate. It was a chaotic crime scene. Police cars, ambulances, flashing lights bathing the area in an eerie glow. The villa loomed in the background, a monument to the horror that had unfolded within its walls. She saw Ingrid Westbay sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, exhausted and battered, being treated by paramedics. Ingrid looked up, their eyes meeting across the distance. A silent acknowledgement of the shared victory, the shared horror. Ingrid had kept her promise. "Mrs. Valentine." Detective Thorne approached her, his expression grim. "Where is she? Where is Kira?" "They're in the ambulance. They're receiving medical attention. They are safe now." Sylvia rushed to the ambulance, the doors open, the interior brightly lit. 3 young women were inside, lying on stretchers, wrapped in blankets. They looked frail, pale, their eyes closed. They looked like ghosts. Sylvia recognized Kira instantly. Her daughter, her baby girl. Older, changed, but undeniably Kira. She climbed into the ambulance, her legs trembling. She reached out, her hand hovering over Kira's face. The skin was pale, translucent. "Kira? Baby? It's Mommy." Kira's eyes opened. They were vacant, unfocused, staring blankly past Sylvia. She didn't recognize her. The reunion was heartbreaking. Sylvia's relief was immediately overwhelmed by the devastating reality of Kira's condition. The years of trauma, the brainwashing, the abuse, it had broken her. It had erased her memory, her identity. "She's not responding," the paramedic said gently. "She's in shock." Dissociative state. Sylvia held Kira's hand, the skin cold, unresponsive. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Mommy's here." She repeated the words like a mantra, a prayer. But Kira didn't hear her. She was lost, trapped in the darkness of her own mind. Sylvia looked at Detective Thorne, her eyes pleading for answers, for reassurance. "Where is Calla? And Zariah?" The question hung in the air, heavy with dread. Thorne hesitated, his expression pained. "They weren't found alive, Mrs. Valentine. I'm so sorry." The words hit Sylvia like a physical blow. Calla, her other daughter, gone. The grief was a tidal wave, crashing over her, threatening to drown her. What happened to them? We don't know yet, but evidence at the scene suggests they died years earlier. We will find out what happened. I promise you. Sylvia nodded, the tears streaming down her face. She had found one daughter, but lost the other. The victory was bittersweet, the closure incomplete. She held Kira's hand, the silence in the ambulance heavy with the weight of the tragedy. The long road to recovery stretched before them, uncertain, daunting. The nightmare was over, but the healing had just begun. But for the first time in 10 years, there was hope. A fragile, flickering flame in the darkness. The arrests of Arthur Sterling and Preston Blackwood sent shockwaves through the film industry and the New York elite. The story broke, becoming a massive scandal, the headlines screaming the horrifying details of the Starlight 5 case. The untouchables had fallen. The evidence Ingrid captured was irrefutable. The video footage from the control room, the servers containing a decade of abuse, the distribution lists exposing a network of wealthy and powerful clients. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, the depravity unimaginable. The investigation expanded, uncovering the extent of the 24/7 filming and the distribution ring. Other powerful individuals were implicated, arrested, their careers destroyed, their reputations shattered. The fallout was immense, exposing the dark underbelly of the entertainment industry, the systemic abuse hidden beneath the veneer of glamour and success. The investigation at the villa uncovered the fates of Calla Valentine and Zariah Ocampo. Their remains were found buried on the property in a secluded area of the woods. Forensic analysis revealed the tragic details of their deaths. Calla had died of an untreated fever, neglected and abandoned by her captors. Zariah had been killed during a violent confrontation after an escape attempt, her spirit unbroken until the end. Sterling and Blackwood were charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, sexual abuse, and murder. The trial was a media circus, the details of their crimes horrifying the public. They were found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ingrid's career was redeemed. She wrote the definitive account of the case, exposing the systemic abuse and the industry cover-up. The City Chronicle published the story, winning numerous awards for investigative journalism. The truth was finally out, but the victory was not without its cost. Ingrid was haunted by what she had witnessed, the images of the broken girls, the realization of the depths of human depravity. The darkness she had uncovered lingered, a shadow over her life. She dedicated her career to investigative journalism focused on protecting victims of systemic abuse, giving a voice to the voiceless, holding the powerful accountable. She found a new purpose in the darkness of the tragedy, a renewed commitment to the truth. The survivors, Kira, Talia, and Jessica, faced a long and arduous road to recovery. The years of trauma and brainwashing had left deep scars. They were placed in intensive therapy, slowly emerging from the darkness of their captivity. Months later, in the early spring of 2010, Ingrid visited Sylvia and Kira. Kira was in a specialized rehabilitation center, making slow, painful progress. Ingrid sat with them in the garden of the center, the sun warm on their faces, the flowers blooming around them. The atmosphere was peaceful, serene. Kira was still quiet, withdrawn, but there was a flicker of light in her eyes, a spark of recognition. She was beginning to reconnect with the world, with her mother. She looked at Sylvia, a faint smile touching her lips. "Mommy." The word hung in the air, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of love. Sylvia hugged Kira, tears streaming down her face, tears of joy, of relief, of hope. Ingrid watched them, a sense of peace settling over her. The battle was won, but the war continued. The darkness still existed, lurking beneath the surface of the civilized world. But so did the light, the hope, the possibility of healing. Ingrid left the garden, the image of Kira's smile etched in her memory. She walked back into the city, the noise and the chaos enveloping her. She was ready to face the next story, the next fight, the next darkness. She was a reporter, and her work was just beginning.